Hey, good morning. This is Bino Rucker here. I'm going to start this little podcast that I'm making because I'm going to feature a friend of mine who I was recently introduced. This is Tuck Taylor. You can see his place is called Beast Athletics. I believe he's in Clearwater. Here's his website, beastathletics.com. He's my new friend. He came into the office. We had an immediate connection because we started to talk about a lot of our readings and aspects of health and wellness that are influencing our opinions and viewpoints that we're therefore conveying to our clients slash patients. I'm going to look at some aspects of his biography. Tuck went to Palm Harbor University High School. Then he had an athletic and academic scholarship at the University of West Florida. He majored in exercise science and graduated with honors. I believe Tuck played basketball there. You can see he became a personal trainer. He struggled for years trying to carve out his own niche in the health and fitness industry. Then ultimately, through his hard work and dedication, he quickly grew Beast Athletics clientele from 30 members to 200 members, and they're in a 4,300 square foot facility. So it's really, look, he's working with Division I college athletes, professional athletes. So why am I telling you all this? Because I'm going to send this podcast to Tuck, but there's an aspect of synchronicity and common ground here as I want to explain a couple things. So now I'm going to move on to Neville Goddard. The first person I'm going to send this blogcast to is Tuck. So here's the website you can find this article, harvbishop.com, a bold new look at new thought. So Tuck and I both have read a lot of Neville Goddard, and that's why I want to talk about this and summarize this amazing article by Mitch Horowitz. So anyone who's watching this can look it up. Neville Goddard, a cosmic philosopher. What's nice about this is you can see from the start here, you can't find out a lot about Neville Goddard. Wikipedia took down its page for Neville Goddard. He lived from 1905 to 1972. So I'm going to summarize some aspects of this that I think are pretty interesting. So Neville's thought system influenced a wide range of spiritual thinkers and writers. Anyone from Joseph Murphy to Carlos Castaneda. I thought that was interesting because a lot of these things came up in my discussions with Tuck. I'm going to come down here. Let's look at his early life. He was born in 1905 in Barbados. A 1950 gossip column described young Neville as enormously wealthy. You know, who knows? It says the truth was far more modest. He depicted his own English childhood home as happy but threadbare. He came to New York City at the age of 17 to study theater. And then it says he was somehow introduced to a turbaned Ethiopian-born rabbi named Abdullah. And then it says, when I first met Abdullah in 1931, I entered a room where he was speaking. When the speech was ending, he came over, extended his hand, and said, "Neville, you were 6 months late." I'd never seen the man before, so I said, "I am 6 months late. How do you know me?" And he replied, "The brothers told me that you were coming, and you were 6 months late." So according to Neville, the two studied Hebrew scripture and Kabbalah together for 5 years, planting the seeds of Neville's philosophy of mental creativity. So ultimately, Neville grew convinced that the scripture was full of this idea that man had to think from the end. He called it the state of I am. Neville would reinterpret each episode in scripture as a psychological parable of this truth. In an example from his 1941 book, Your Faith is Your Fortune, he took a fresh sounding of the tale of Lot's wife, and he basically said, not knowing that consciousness is ever out picturing itself in conditions round about you, like Lot's wife, you continually look back upon your problem and again become hypnotized by its seeming naturalness. That's a pretty profound description of how Neville takes scripture and teaches us how to interpret it in the manner that he felt the Bible was supposed to be interpreted. I found that very interesting. And I'm going to go down further. It says, in his eyes, all of Scripture is nothing other than a blueprint for man's development. The Bible has no reference at all to any person who ever existed or any event that ever occurred upon earth. That would be very controversial, but Neville explained this to audiences. All the stories of the Bible unfold in the minds of the individual man. Neville depicted Christ not as a living figure, but rather as a mythical master psychologist whose miracles and parables demonstrate the power of creative thought. The last two things that are very interesting in this article, and the whole article is great, but there's some interesting references to Madame Blavatsky. And then Joseph Murphy, he wrote The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, and it says shortly before his death in 1981, in a little-known series of interviews, Murphy described his own encounter with the mysterious Abdullah. So Murphy says that he met Professor Abdullah, a Jewish man of black ancestry, a native Israel who knew in every detail all the symbolism of each of the verses of the Old and New Testaments. In fact, Abdullah had never seen Murphy's family, said flatly that he had come from a family of 6 children. Later on, Murphy, intrigued, questioned his mother and learned that indeed he had a brother who had died a few hours before his birth and was never spoken again. Then Castaneda wove his own tales of mentorship to a shadowy instructor, in his case a Native American sorcerer named Don Juan. So then it says, a cousin of American storyteller Damon Runyon named Margaret wooed the Latin art student at a friend's house, slipping Carlos a slender Neville volume called The Search, in which she had inscribed her name and phone number. So it looks like Runyon spoke frequently to Castaneda about her mystical teacher Neville, but he responded with little more than mild interest, with one exception. In his memoirs, Runyon recalled Castaneda growing fascinated when the conversation turned to Neville's discipleship under an exotic teacher. So he basically influenced many things, and the final point I want to leave you with is, was there a real esoteric teacher named Abdullah who taught Neville and Joseph Murphy? A plausible candidate exists. He is found in the figure of 1920s and 30s era black nationalist mystic named Arnold Josiah Ford. Like Neville, Ford was born in Barbados. And as you go down further, it says here that Ford ended up influencing someone who I had heard of, very fascinating, which is Marcus Garvey. There it is. Ford was also an early supporter of black nationalist pioneer Marcus Garvey and served as the musical director of Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey had also suffused his movement with New Thought metaphysics and phraseology. Let me go back up here. One thing I think my friend Tuck will find interesting is that Ford arrived in Harlem in 1910, and he established himself as a leading voice in the Ethiopianism movement, a precursor to Jamaican Rastafarianism. Both movements held that the East African nation of Ethiopia was home to a lost Israelite tribe that had preserved the teachings of a mystical African belief system. Ford considered himself an original Israelite and a man of authentic Judaic descent. Like Abdullah, Ford was considered an Ethiopian rabbi. So as I go further down here, this author is questioning, does Neville's method does his method work? And this seems like a great book that Tuck and I need to read, and anyone who might be watching this. In The Romance of Metaphysics by someone named Regardie. Israel Regardie took measure of this creative mind movement, including unity, Christian Science, and the science of the mind, and he paid special attention to Neville's teaching. So there's more in this article. I'll go down to the end and you can see it's written by someone named Mitch Horowitz. Thanks for watching.